Hello everyone, I am Olha Tamanova. Welcome at Ukraine Media Center at Crimean Platform. It is 104th day of full-scale invasion of the Russia's aggressor, and we will have today Andrei Demchenko from the State Border Service of Ukraine. We will be discussing the situation at the state borders of Ukraine. Also, we will have an online conversation with Vitaly Kim, the head of Mykolaiv Regional Administration. And right now we have with us Tamila, Tasheva, the permanent representative of the President of Ukraine in the Republic of Crimea. We will hear about illegal conviction of journalists and civic journalists in the occupied Crimea, and also the Russian propaganda narratives that are circulating in the peninsula. The floor is yours, Tamila. Thank you so much. Hello, dear colleagues. Actually, yesterday we were celebrating the Journalist Day, and thus I wanted to share about the situation with the journalism in the occupied territory of the Crimea. But this same approaches that Russia is using in the Crimean Peninsula and later also in Donetsk and Luhansk region, convicting the journalists, cleansing the information space. This is something they continue to do in the newly occupied territories, the ones they occupied after the full-scale invasion this year. So the first thing that the occupation troops have committed back in 2014 in spring was the persecution of independent journalists in the territory of the Crimean Peninsula, and specifically in the very beginning of the Russian occupation, there were over 100 cases of violations of the rules of bloggers, journalists. Later, the entire newsrooms had to leave the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. Then followed the persecution of journalists working in the conditions of the occupation after the so-called referendum and illegal annexation of the Crimea, which we do not recognize as the rest of the world. So some examples are Anna Andreevska, the journalist that now works here in Ukraine, Anna Mykola Semena, and many other journalists as well. The newsrooms of the Center of Journalist Investigations, the Black Sea Media Company, the ATR holding with all the media included in it. And as of April 1, 2015, according to the data of the occupation services, there were in the Crimean Peninsula 232 media registered. And for instance, in January 2014, there were over 3,000 media registered there, the ones who could work in the territory of the Republic of the Crimea. So this shows how the cleansing of the information space was happening. Right now, there are virtually no independent journalists in the Crimea, and if we compare this to the situation at the newly occupied territories in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, we can see persecution of Oleg Baturin and other journalists who are staying in the basements. Right now, we don't even know about their current fates. And also the occupational administrations and troops, they have seized the media, and they are now broadcasting their Russian media on the same frequencies where the Ukrainian media were broadcasted. So these are all the regular actions that we could expect from the Russian Federation, and they are happening here again. This terrible experience of the temporarily occupied Crimea needs to be taken into account if we want to foresee the next steps of the aggressor. And they have also made a number of changes in the law of the Russian Federation. They have limited the freedom of internet back in 2014 and 15. Then some changes were introduced to the administrative code of the Russian Federation, making the providers block content which allegedly contains some of the calls for extremism. And also in the Crimea, there is this concept of civic journalism. Since the independent media were not working in the Crimea, they were forced to leave. Then this civic journalism emerged. These are the people who were not professionally involved in journalism before. Previously, they could have been lawyers, service providers, etc. They were basically filming the things that were happening in the Crimea with their cell phones. And over the last 7 years, the majority of information we are getting from there comes from such civic journalists. 16 of them are detained, and some names include Rimzi Bekirov, Server Mustafayev, Osman Arifmemetov, Alexei Besarapov, and many others. And quite recently, your colleague Irina Danilovich, the civic journalist who have been working there for 8 years as a civic journalist covering the court cases and also healthcare in the occupied territories. Right now, she is detained in Simferopol jail. She is being convicted in the extremism activity and also collaborating with the enemy. So this is the only case of a woman who is currently detained for the journalism activity. But also it's very important to emphasize here, and it was mentioned in the announcement of the today's press conference, that after the 24th of February, the media has become yet another front of this war, and all the propaganda narratives that are being circulated in the Crimean occupational media, they are also playing a certain role, turning people into zombies. And I will share just some examples. These are the quotes. Please understand that these are not the words of a representative of the Ukrainian government. These are the statements of the Russian propaganda. Well, our military are performing the tasks of the special operations in Mariupol, Kherson, and Kharkiv. The Crimea is safe. So this is their traditional narrative that right now there will be no war in the Crimea. Crimea is alive and well. We are keeping peace here in the Crimea, but at the same time, they are promoting this narrative of the Russian occupational administration that the Russian troops are performing some holy mission, the mission of liberation of the population and the territory of the Ukrainian state. Another narrative that is quite popular, and it's being promoted through social media and propaganda TV channels in the Crimea, is that the Crimea bridge is safe and it's well protected. So in this we can see some fear on the part of the occupational administration. There is some assumption that the Ukrainian military can attack this bridge. So they are persuading here the people that there is no danger for the bridge. What was happening prior to that? They were actually spreading the information that we encourage civilians not to travel through the Kerch Bridge because it can be attacked. So the narratives seem to be contradictory. On the one hand, don't go there because it's unsafe. On the other hand, the bridge is somehow protected. I will be mentioning just some of the narratives, although we have many examples here. But just one more example is that Putin is the leader of the Crimea. And the entire Crimea is covered with the portraits of Putin on billboards, city lights, etc. And also they are actually making children learn Putin's speeches by heart in some simplified language, even in kindergartens and at schools also. Yet another narrative that they are sharing is that the prices in the Crimea are artificially being increased by those trying to earn money on the residents of the Crimea, and they claim that Aksionov and the leadership of the Crimea and the administration are personally controlling the prices, and they will be regulating the prices. So this way, basically, the occupational administration is recognizing that the prices are going up, and this is understandable because of the sanctions, because of the logistics chains that were disrupted, and in the Russian Federation as well. So some goods are just unavailable in the territory of the peninsula. Also, there is a narrative of the great economic future of the Crimea. They say that thanks to the decisions by Mr. Vladimir Putin and bringing back water to the Crimean Canal, there are new opportunities for agriculture in the Crimea. But it's quite understandable here that they are using their old water narrative. And you may recall that in February, the first thing that they did is that they seized the North Crimean Canal and the dam, and some water was flowing into the Crimea, but on the Crimean side, the canal was not ready. And still, although the water is of poor quality, they can use it for irrigation, while Ukraine is, of course, sustaining huge losses because of such illegal use of water. And also, there are narratives that have to do with the military and security component. They say the Crimea is ready to host all the participants of the special operation, providing them health and recreation services. So the families from the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, the military who were fighting on the side of Russia, they are already mentioning that about 150 children will be hosted there for recreation. Actually, this means that there is no tourism season in the Crimea this year. They will be using their recreational centers to host these family members of the Russian and pro-Russian military, and this way they are showing their connection with the so-called republics, with the republics in the east of Ukraine, and they do so by hosting the children from there and providing recreational services. And one more narrative here is that the Crimea and Kherson are a single entity. The Tauric region. So again, the plans of the occupiers have not been accomplished, but one of the plans they had was to hold a so-called referendum in the non-government controlled territory, issuing passports, etc. This plan has not been implemented because the majority of people who would be able to organize this process in Kherson region, they actually refused to do so, and also at least some numbers of people were necessary to participate, and again this was not an option, so they started thinking about joining the non-government controlled parts of Kherson, Zaporizhia and Mykolaiv regions. They suggest to join them with the territory of the Crimea, and according to our current information, this option is deemed failed already too. They are thinking about other options, but none of them is in place yet. So in Kherson region, the passports department are getting ready for the mass issuing of the Russian passports. Of course, the Ukrainian government does not recognize such passports. We did not recognize the ones issued in the Crimean Peninsula and Donetsk and Lugansk regions as well. According to the international law, this is deemed imposed citizenship. It has no legal power behind it, and the actions of the occupiers in Kherson region are also against the international humanitarian law. These are surely military crimes, wartime crimes, and all the people involved in the issuing of such passports, they need to be held responsible according to the penal law, because this is the contribution to the occupational regime of the aggressor country. So this narrative of the Tauric region about the unity of the Crimea and Kherson region, it is being promoted gradually, and the media from the Crimea are traveling to Kherson region. They are covering the events in Kherson region, but they present it as their own territory. So we, as the Ukrainian government, will be countering this effort of the forced issuing of passports, and the people involved will be held responsible. That's basically it about the situation with the illegally detained journalists and the narratives and the communication field. Any other questions? Well, looking into the narratives you have just shared, we understand that all of these narratives have been shaped specifically for the residents of the Crimea. But what about the general narratives popular in the Russian Federation? For instance, claiming that Ukrainians are Nazis, fascists, etc. Do they work there? Yes. I have just read the ones that are distributed through the media, forums, Telegram channels, other social media. Of course, this is the crucial thing that they keep mentioning, that this is denazifying of the territory, that this is a protection of the Russian-speaking population. Surely this is something distributed in the Crimean Peninsula. So, in the hindsight, looking at the events of the 2014, we may recall that one of the key narratives that circulated back there was that this was the protection of the Banderites, of the Kyiv junta. This is the narrative that they were sharing in the Crimea through the Ukrainian media back in the day, although everyone could understand where the money was coming from. But the narrative was quite obvious that Ukrainians would punish you for speaking the language you speak, for not supporting the revolution of dignity. They will force you and your children to speak Ukrainian, although you may recall that the majority of educational institutions in the Crimea were instructing in Russian, and also in the government institutions, etc. They were speaking Russian in the Crimea. In Ukrainian, it was much more difficult and to see nothing of the Crimean Tatar language. So these same Russian narratives are still there, and of course there are also some specific narratives that are shaped for the Crimea and also Crimea and the neighboring regions of Kherson and Zaporizhia. Coming back to the subject of journalists and our active community over there in Kherson, I know that you are following the situation quite closely, and we hear lots of messages about mass detainment, about people disappearing, people being afraid to go to the streets or walking alone, etc. Do we have any idea about the numbers of such people detained? Yeah, thank you for this question. Surely we are tracking this information quite actively, and my deputy, Denis Chistikov, who was appointed on the 25th of April. He is originally from Kherson. He knows the situation there quite well. He has some connection in the territories that are non-government controlled right now. We therefore have some of our own sources. We also uphold communication with the activists who had to leave the territory of Kherson region. Thus, according to our information, in Kherson region, there are about 600 people who are basically held hostage. They are staying in some basements, in some torture rooms. And for instance, they are staying in the building of Kherson regional administration. They are staying in the premises of one of the jails in Kherson, and also the professional school in Yenichisk. In Kherson itself, there are about 300 people in such basements, but the rest of them are in other places in the territory of the region. And also, we need to point out that the majority of them are journalists and activists, the one involved in the pro-Ukrainian protests in Kherson city and the region. And specifically, many of them were the journalists responsible for communication with large numbers of people, the de facto organizers of such protests. So these people are kept in the inhumane conditions. Some tortures are being used against them, and these places, it's reported that there are some sounds of shouting coming from there. And also some people are being deported from the Kherson region to the territory of the Crimea, to Simferopol and Sevastopol jails. There are some civilian people held there, such as journalists, but also there are the military, the prisoners of war, and there were also the ones who were fleeing Mariupol, and for them, Crimea was the only way. And during the so-called filtration processes, again, some people were detained and brought to the jail of Simferopol. So we heard from our sources that one of the departments of Simferopol jail is now used for civilian prisoners and also the military prisoners of war, those who were detained at the administrative border of the Crimea and the ones who were deported from Kherson and Zaporizhia regions, and of course they are also the ones staying in inhumane conditions, and there is some psychological pressure against such families as well. Other questions, please? No questions for now. Thank you, Tamila, for joining us. This was Tamila Tasheva, and our next briefing is going to take place at 1:30. We will have with us the speaker of the State Border Service of Ukraine. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.